Okay, greetings, compadres. Greetings. Today on the Boozeless Book Club, we have something different today that we've never done before. So, of course, that's exciting. I am personally pumped about it. And so, of course, we have Elise Bryson, who is one of our regular reviewers, book reviewers, with us. And Elise has a brand new podcast, I think. Is this correct?
No, do I?
Okay, here's what I read. And I'm going to get it wrong, but there was a title and it was something like Sober, Not Mature.
Oh, I was on somebody else. I was on the Sober Not Mature podcast last week as a guest. You know, it seems like I have a podcast because I go on so many other people's podcasts.
I know.
And I produce like 3 or 4 podcasts now, but no, I don't have one. I just go on everybody else's because I just talk so much that one would not be enough for me. Just like drinking, one was not enough for me there either.
Of course. Well, okay, then I love it. We will set that record straight. She does not actually have her own, but she's so much fun to listen to that I don't know. I don't know what
and I am sober, not mature. I do identify in that way.
It's fitting, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And those guys are not mature either. I can tell you, if you haven't checked out their podcast, highly recommend. 2 stars.
Love that. Okay,
It's
good.
2 stars low. 2 stars is probably low. 4 stars.
Well, thanks for clearing that up. I really appreciate that. And so here's the deal is for this month, we read a book called Killing Hurt, and it's by Will Thatcher. And here's why today's episode is different. Guess who's here today with Elise and me? Will Thatcher. Can you guys believe that?
Dun, dun, dun. A book review with the author.
What? Hello.
There he is.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I love it so much. And so if it's okay with you guys, what I'm going to do is just read the blurb so that everybody can kind of get a little bit of context. And here it is. So this is the blurb for Killing Hurt. Troy Martin is a good guy who has done a lot of bad things. After decades of anger and violence, he embarks on a surfing trip to Nicaragua with 4 years of sobriety under his belt. He's trying to be a new man traveling a spiritual path. Troy catches amazing waves and attends local AA meetings, Alcoholics Anonymous, where he makes eccentric and dangerous new friends. These resentments he carries around cause him to make bad decisions with tragic, bloody consequences. He still attempts to fight his way through, leaving a trail of dead bodies behind until his present comes face to face with his past. In order to make it out of Central America alive, he will have to come to terms with lifelong resentments and make amends for his deeds. He will have to lay to rest his younger selves, both the hurt child and the adult who did the hurting. So well written.
Dun, dun,
dun. So this is such a fascinating genre to me. And Will, this is partially why, like, this is such a gift to have you here today, is because addiction fiction, I don't know, maybe it's been around longer than I know of, but I hadn't heard of it until Elise had mentioned it to me. And immediately I was like, what is this? Pray tell. And so I read the book. Elise read the book. From the very first paragraph, I was hooked. I don't know what to say other than that. I was definitely pulled in. And so if you wouldn't mind just starting off, like telling us a little bit about what is addiction fiction and how did you come up with this storyline?
Thank you, by the way, for having me on. I didn't really get really deep into addiction fiction until I was about halfway into this book. I didn't really realize that it was a thing. I had never read an addiction fiction book. And then I started looking for them. And I did manage to find a handful of books that I really enjoyed. And Elise has given me a great platform to start writing reviews for those books. You can check out the addiction fiction book reviews that I've been publishing on the Sober Curator. And now I'm like totally hooked on the genre. And it's a little thin, to be honest with you, in terms of, what's out there, which to me is a little bit exciting. It's a little bit of the Wild West. I have read a number of really good memoirs. I've read a number of really good how to get sober books. And I've never read anything with a strong sober character in it, with the types of themes that I'm interested in from recovery. I've seen dozens of movies like that, but I'm a fiction guy. I mean, that's what I grew up on. I love the genre. And that's just kind of the way I think. And part of my program is, I do an inventory every night. And the way that I do that is I journal. And so I'm always sort of keeping track of different themes and ideas related to recovery that are interesting to me. And because I love to write, I tend to think about those things in the context of a character who's going through that situation. And I've had a couple of things happen in my life that were very emotional, and the general story just presented itself to me. And then one day I was actually in the diner after a meeting with my sponsor and a couple of other guys, and he said, my sponsor told me that he was taking acting classes. And I was like, wow, I'm really jealous. That sounds amazing. I'd love to have some kind of creative outlet. And I was like, wait, I have a thing that I do that's creative. I'm a writer. I write, so I sat down and I started writing the book. And, within a few months, I had the first draft done.
That's incredible. And P.S., and by the way, not to make this about Elise and me, but we are not taking acting classes, but we did take an improv class. So we're pretty funny. We're like funnier now than we were like 9 months ago. So just FYI.
Yeah.
That's terrifying, doing improv. I'll give you a lot of credit for that. I could never do that.
Well, it was an online course that was self-guided, so it was not. In fact, I signed up for it, and I called Amy. I was like, so I just signed up for an improv class that's self-guided online. Like, if I'm the only one in the room laughing, how do I know if I'm funny?
Right.
She was like, I'll do it with you. So yes, we're definitely funnier now. For
definitely.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I just think this, Will, when you and I connected online, it was 2 months ago now. And I've read some books that are addiction fiction, but had not heard it like the coined phrase of a genre. And then I was like, oh, it's such an untapped genre. And it's so rare to come across things that are untapped. So I was so excited to have you come and do your reviews on the Sober Curator in the addiction fiction section that's housed inside of our Quitlick section, especially as somebody in long-term recovery. I have also read a lot of memoirs. I have also read a lot of self-help books, but at 17 years sober, no offense to all the new books coming out, I don't care. Like, I don't need to read how you got sober anymore. Like, I've got that kind of beat down. I have new classy problems, like dealing with landscapers, but like, I don't get as much as out of those books anymore because it's not the space I'm in. And people still send me a lot because I review them for the website. So I read them, and I'm not saying I don't enjoy them. I definitely do. But the idea of being able to read all these fiction stories that have one of the main characters have addiction, mental health, recovery as part of the storyline. Now, sign me up for that book club. Like, I give you my credit card. Like, give me as many books as you can. Like, here for it. And I love how you touched on the fact that we actually do see this a fair amount in movies and TV shows. We're seeing it more and more now, and we're seeing it in less stereotypical Sandra Bullock 28 Days ways, right? So I'm here for all of that too, but I love that this is a genre. And so when you sent your book, I was like, oh, I'm very excited. And then when Amy was like, what should our next book be? And I always selfishly like to try to get her to read a book I'm already reading, because then, then less I have to read. I read a lot, and it's just like, there's only so many hours in the day. But I have to tell you, this was, for me, your book was 2 nights of hardcore reading. And I got super wrapped into, I love fiction because I love where my mind takes me visually. Yeah. And I've never been to Nicaragua, but we did just recently publish an article that Amy did on going to Costa Rica. And we just plan to do a Costa Rica sober curator retreat in 2024. So it's like, oh, the universe is aligning to have me focused on this area of the globe. So I got really excited to sit down and read the book. And then the first night, I got to say, the first night I sat down to read it, I read the first page. I was like, ooh, I don't know if I should be reading this before I go to bed. This sounds kind of dark and grisly, which I'm here for. But I was like, maybe I need to pick a different time of day. So I put it down. And then I came back to it, whatever it was, a week or two later, and then 2 nights and I was done. So I really enjoyed the storyline. It made me feel like I can see this as I can see this playing on a screen, on a movie screen, or an 8-episode series on Netflix. Like I could see it, right? I could see it. And I was excited to watch the twists and the turns, and then also how the main character's recovery wraps into the storyline. In this case, it's 12 steps. So of course, now you're speaking my love language, right? And so I just loved the unexpected turns that the book took as it relates to going to meetings and the different phrases that we use. And if 12-step is one of the pathways of recovery that you've explored, all you listeners out there, then there's a lot of hidden gems and nuances you will pick up on that maybe somebody else who is not as familiar with 12-step will pick up on. And I thought that was really cool too, because I like feeling like I'm an insider, like I've got some kind of inside knowledge on what's going down, right? And I also like to like when I'm reading a story like this, I like to be like, oh, I'm already going to figure out how this is going to end. Like I can call it. I know we're not talking about how it ends today because we want people to go read the book for themselves. But I thought it was super well done. Of course, I love anything that's in a beach, surf, tropical setting. I mean, hello. Although now I'm a little intimidated to leave the country also. So that's probably a good thing. You did the writing right. But it was a super fun read on my end.
Yeah, I agree for sure. Because like Elise said, I just got back from Costa Rica in the spring. And I've never been to Nicaragua. So all of that, though, the whole concept of having this surf community and what that looks like. Back in the 80s, I watched Point Break and, all of the scenes with Dylan from 90210 when he was like out there on his board and everything. And so for you to have painted this picture of Troy and then all the people that he met, and then even just the different places around Costa Rica, I mean, that was all familiar to me in terms of the locations. And I thought you did such a good job at creating that space where I could really envision for myself what the characters looked like. And I love that because that is one of my favorite things about fiction is using my own imagination. And then like later on when I see the movie being bummed out that like, wait a minute, Mr. So-and-so isn't supposed to look like that. Oh, and P.S. sidebar for all you listeners, there's a character in this book named Dale Daggers. I mean, is that not the best name ever?
That's a real person.
If I enter the witness protection program, that's going to be my name. So I guess I just blew it. But anyway, I thought you did a great job with that. And then there were all these little things woven in that I loved so much, like being in the back of the pickup truck and listening to the rap music, and then DJ Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince comes on, and then the guys are rapping to that. And I mean, I'm Gen X, so I of course appreciated that. And I thought you just did an incredible job of painting the scenes.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. I mean, there's so many things to address there. I don't even know where to begin. But I think in terms of the physical descriptions of people, that's something that I enjoy also. I like to, when I'm writing, give just like a couple or a few markers on a person and then let the reader fill in the rest. Like I know what the person kind of looks like in my mind, but that's not necessarily going to work for you. So that's fun. And then, in terms of what Elise was saying, I totally get it. I'm not that interested in how you got sober stories, at this point. That was super important to me 5 years ago. that was my life kind of depended on that 5 years ago. And it was, I needed to hear as much of that as I could. But like, this is a story that picks up 4 years into sobriety when somebody thinks that they've kind of got it. And I like those types of stories at this point. Like, what happens next? You've gone through the steps, or you've done, whatever your recovery program is. And then life goes on and you're 4 or 5 years in, and life kind of gets very lifey for you. And, to me, that's what's interesting right now. And I set this up so that none of us, I don't want to speak for everybody else, but when I went through the steps, I did a pretty good job, but I didn't do everything. I was not as thorough as a human being could possibly be. And so I wanted to set this story up. One of the main ideas that I had in mind when I sat down to write it was that he would have to resolve the things that were unresolved, that were left undone, if he was going to get out of it. In fact, if he was going to survive, that he was going to have to deal with the things, the rocks that he didn't turn over, that he chose to leave. A lot of times when we don't turn those rocks over in recovery, it does kill us. And in his case, it would literally have killed him if he didn't, come to terms with those things. So I thought that was kind of a cool concept that I was playing with. I was trying to figure out, how to construct a story around that.
I think that's one of the things I loved about it the most. And I can also only speak from my experience. So I'm sure everybody has their own different experiences. But yes, there's this confidence, this illusion of confidence when you hit 3 or 4 years that somehow you've got it figured out. Because, life's probably gotten better. You probably have a little more money in the bank. Maybe your job, career, something's going good. Your relationship's going good. But there's still more work to be done. There's more layers to peel back. And in my case, around the 4-year mark, I got real broken, almost, I would say, arguably more broken than when I first got sober, because I realized that there were certain patterns of behavior I was still doing that were not making me happy and not in alignment with what my new and improved true self wanted. So I loved watching this character go through that and realizing, oh, wait, sobriety is not we don't get to some level 57 and we've arrived and boom, give us our golden coin and send us on our way. There's always work to be done. I also think you did a really nice job at bouncing back and forth between the current time and then flashbacks. Yeah. Those can be tricky. I've never written enough to know how that balance goes, but I can imagine they're tricky to follow as a reader, so they've got to be tricky to write. And I felt like I was very clear on where I was when I was reading. I always knew if I was in the present day or in a flashback, whereas there's other times with other books, I have been confused on, wait, where am I at? Even with TV shows, it can be a little confusing. And so I appreciated that that part was not confusing. And it also gave me I got to see a little deeper side of Troy and really what his baggage is. And I dated a motorcycle cop in early recovery. He was hot, and it was fun to ride that motorcycle, I gotta tell you. So in my mind, I started imagining him, right? I was just like, oh yeah, this is totally Troy. So that was fun for me. And so, yeah, I really appreciated how he still had stuff to figure out.
The flashbacks were super hard to write, actually. I probably have 2 more books full of stuff that I edited out, from, the background stuff. When I start writing those things, I just kind of fall in love with the characters, and it just kind of goes and goes and goes. And to distill that down to, just what the reader needs to know, that actually makes the current day story, come alive a little bit more and be relevant. And to have it still be, compelling and interesting to read in and of itself, is a real challenge. I mean, his father, for example, I fell in love with the character of Joe, and I wrote all this stuff about him. I was super interested in him, and my editor looked at it and he's like, I can see that you are in love with this, but it all has to go.
Joe has to go. No,
yeah, he's like, Joe's not that important. You need to get this down, get rid of it, figure it out. And I think it's a little heartbreaking, to part with a lot of that stuff. But yeah, it was super challenging, but I'm happy with the way that it turned out.
So Will, don't scrap all that Joe stuff, because I'm telling you, and this is just food for thought, it is possible, should you so choose in the future, to actually recycle Joe and name him something else and put him in another book.
Totally.
So
Yeah.
I'm just saying. Yeah.
I could totally agree with you. In fact, I wouldn't even mind writing a book about him because he's a hardcore addict story, which is super interesting. He might be more interesting than Troy, and, he's, I think you could stand a story up around him very easily.
Yeah. And it goes back to that whole concept too of like everything is useful. And if it, I don't know, if it connects us in any way, I have to tell you that with even in my memoir, my editor pulled like a whole separate book out of there and was like, this is a whole thing and it doesn't belong here. And, I don't want you to throw it away or scrap it, but I mean, it goes along with that whole concept of like, okay, this is all useful in recovery, right? All these things that I'm going through now that may look different than the things that I did at the beginning of my recovery or didn't yet do, or whatever I'm facing today, it's going to be useful in some way, not in an everything happens for a reason type of way, but in the reframing that we're taught so often to do in recovery that, all right, if I can open my mind to it, right? So it's just, that's a really positive thing that you shared right there, I think. And so I'm excited to see. I mean, we never know. The next book might be all 100% Joe. And then who knows?
It might be about one of his daughters. Like, we don't know. We don't know
Right.
where the stories are going to go from here.
Yeah.
Well, the next book's already written. I can tell you it's not about Joe.
Not about Joe. Okay.
Yeah.
Or the daughters. Okay, fine.
No, maybe the third book will be about one of those things.
I love it. So now, would you say, without giving too much of it away, would you say that you identify with Troy?
Not really. It's interesting. So a couple of people have said to me, "Oh, you wrote a book about yourself, a sober guy who surfs," and really not. He's a very different person than me. I did put on him, some character traits, and I'm working some themes out that are interesting to me through him. But as an individual, I think we're really very different.
I'm glad you asked that question. Because we don't know each other that well yet. It's only been a couple of months. So I didn't know if this was loosely based on you or not. So I'm glad you asked that question.
Yeah, no, it's really not. I think that, I have experienced a lot of the things that he's experienced, but my circumstances have been very different from his. I relate to him, obviously. I relate to all the characters in the book. That's sort of the cool thing about addiction fiction is that, whenever I hear a sober story, part of that is my story. And, it resonates with me at a level that it probably wouldn't resonate with a normie, but he's definitely not me.
You're not Andy either, are you? Because I'm not. Andy is definitely the bad guy in this situation for me.
Yeah.
It's funny you say that because
agree.
I was trying so hard not to make him just like a pure bad guy, just trying to make him empathetic, a little bit.
That guy.
But yeah, that guy. Yeah, somebody described him. I have somebody who's become a friend, who's actually another addiction fiction writer, described him as a sober horse thief. I'd never heard that term before.
From the very get, I was like, nope, no good's gonna come from Andy. There's something not good here. There's something not good about Andy. I can sniff it out. I can
Something
smell
smells
it out.
rotten.
Yeah, yep. I can spot him in a church basement. I'm spotting it now. Yep.
Yeah, that whole relationship, that dynamic was, based on a loosely, obviously, on a situation that I had in sobriety, where somebody who I thought had this amazing spirituality and around with such a great vibe told me that he would be my sponsor. And it was a nightmare. The guy was a disaster of a sponsor and was unavailable and disinterested. And, it was to me like a real violation. To me, that's a sacred sort of job that you take on when you tell somebody that you're going to be their sponsor. And it culminated with a weekend when my son was going off to college for the first time. It was my first kid going off to college, and I was losing it. I was having an absolute meltdown. And I don't have meltdowns. So this is not like a regular thing that happens for me. It was a real emotional, hard situation. And I was calling him, and he wouldn't answer the phone. And like the second day, he sent me a text with 2 words. He said, "Let go." I was like, I'm going to kill this guy.
Mm.
I'm going to freaking kill this guy. When I see him, I'm going to punch him right in the face. I was like that, that dynamic to me, was an interesting situation, because it's such a violation in my mind that whenever can generate that kind of emotion in a person, I feel like it accelerates a story.
Absolutely. And I think that's such a good point too, is that this whole concept, I'm thinking about it now, hearing you share about that and then thinking about, gosh, there are all these characters that I could maybe pull out from my own life. We all kind of have seen, if you've got sober through the 12 steps and have attended meetings, we all kind of know, like, there's the 13th steppers and there's I'm not trying to categorize people, but it's just kind of something that organically sort of happens, and there's the, ones who are the Dr. Bob Akron group sort of thumpers, where it's like, do the first 3 steps in the parking lot. And then there are the California sober groups and all the different kind of folks. So I think that's just a magical thing, actually, to be able to, your brain can sort of just run wild in developing these characters a little bit. And
Exactly. And mine
concept.
does. That's such a good point. And now I've gotten to the point where I always go to a lot of new meetings. I try to mix it up and go to new places. And in a weird way, this has kind of refreshed my program, because I sit down, I listen to a speaker, or I just listen to somebody share or whatever. And I've got that in the back of my mind, like, oh, I'm really interested. First of all, AA stories are inherently interesting. You hear just the most amazing stories. And I love that about it, because I love stories. The characters are unbelievable. Like you said, you get some world-class characters in AA meetings. And for me, it's become a thing where I try to take that back home with me and sketch it out and put it in my journal that night. Met this guy today. He said this, he looked like that. And he seemed like the type of person who boom, 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 boom. And I love that. It's such a bottomless resource for me.
I love it so much. I was thinking about a meeting that I was actually on last night, and there was a guy on there who was saying, like, because we're like doing this, like, drop the rock kind of thing. So we're working on 6 and 7, and we're workshopping this step 6 and 7. And he's like, it's so weird to me to picture all of you guys loaded. And that has crossed my mind before in meetings too. But it was just funny to have somebody say that out loud in the workshop. It's like, yeah, you would get an entirely different set of characters than are seated here right now in this moment, because of the whole personality change. So, yeah, it's a fascinating way to think about, the different aspects of self, and the shadow self, and all of the different parts of us that can be brought forth in different situations or with chemicals added. So
That's super interesting to me. I think that all the time. What was this person like X years ago? But what's also interesting to me is, what is this person like outside of the room? What are they like in their house with their family? What are they like in the car when somebody cuts them off? What are they like, in the gym when somebody doesn't put their weights away? Like, right now they seem like this type of person, but I'd love to see them out in the wild and see, how far their program goes.
yep.
Well, and I don't know if you guys have ever watched the TV series Louder Milk. Have you seen the TV series Louder Milk? Highly recommend. Of course, you can see the full review over at the Sober Curator. It's got, I forget the name of the actor. He was in The Office, Livingston. His last name is Livingston. And he plays his character, Sam Loudermilk. It takes place in Seattle, so obviously I also like it for that reason. He's a music journalist, and he is in a sober friends meeting, is what they call it. And it's three seasons. I think there's 3 seasons of it, and I think the episodes are half an hour, so it's lots of quick hits. But it's all the characters that comes to play in this sober friends meeting, which is, it's supposed to be a men's meeting, but it's There's other people that show up in it too. They don't keep it exclusively for men. But it's a great example of all the different characters that come into peer group setting meeting, support group meetings. And then, yes, how they act inside of the meeting versus how they act in the parking lot or anywhere else throughout the world. So many great stories, which is why I think there's so much opportunity for addiction fiction. Like, I just think it's fantastic.
Yeah, agreed. And you know that's just the character side, and then you've got the theme side of it, which to me is very exciting because every time I go to a meeting, I hear two, three, four, different ideas that people are talking about. And to me, that's the couple people ask me why are you writing fiction? Like real life stories in addiction are so vivid and so interesting. Why bother? There's a reason why it's not a genre. But to me, a like professionally constructed story around specific themes that is concise, it's much neater than a real life story. You can't, like, a real life story meanders a little bit, it doesn't stick to the plot. People are not as consistent as they are in fiction. And so in a weird way, it's almost more freeing to just construct it in my own little universe, with the people I want, with the themes that I want, and lay it all out and have control over the whole thing and be able to tie it up at the end the way I want to. And real life doesn't behave that way. So
real life is not all just happy endings. You're right.
Yeah, and I'm trying to get away from the happy endings also. My current book I wrote had a really dark ending, and my editor read it and he was like, "There's no way we're releasing this book." He's like, "People will hate you."
Whoa.
He was like, "You cannot make people like these people this much and then do that at the end." So I'm not a huge happy endings, fan, and I was trying to get away from that a little bit, but I think I may have strayed too far in the other direction on that one, where we redid it a little bit.
But I think that's real. I think that is reality. So even in fiction, people can relate to things that are realistic, right? And the whole happy ending thing, although it's kind of warm and fuzzy and it makes us, feel good. I mean, how am I wanted to ask this? Like, how much are we painting a picture for a newcomer that and for somebody like my book, and then I got sober and everything was fabulous. And that's why, I mean, and I'm not trying to be negative about my story, but that's why it's so important to have opportunities like the one that you have created, and also in having adopted the whole concept of addiction fiction and be writing for that genre, because that's what we need as people who have been around a few years, is to see even how other characters, real or fictitious, navigate their sobriety through these different stages in life. And I know for me, and it's not that I cannot benefit from hearing a newcomer's story, I always can, always need to hear him. But sometimes I'm like, gosh, I might not be able to relate to being on probation again, and trying to then figure out, how do I translate that to what I'm currently going through, and what can I hear, and praying for that spiritual connection and those spiritual ears to be able to hear something that I need to hear that can help somebody else, or that can help my situation or whatever. And I think that that's powerful, because it's true with Quit Lit, and I can say it because I've written it, right? That when you get to the end, you're at the end, and the end is it's kind of predictable. And I think that people expect that it's going to be sort of predictable.
But I think people also intuitively understand that that's not the end, right? Your life continued on from there. That's the end of that part of the story. And, what's interesting to me is what happens next, right?
Yeah.
Life gets good, your circumstances improve. And to me, that's when sobriety gets interesting. That's when you really come across, like Elise was saying, potentially some of your biggest challenges.
Right.
And this has been the theme of the conversations that I've been in just this week, two parts to see if I can be concise and not go down rabbit holes. One is somebody asked me earlier this week, Elise, how many meetings do you go to a week? And I'm like, well, none if I can help it. Like, and that's not true. I mean, I have a home group and I go once a week and I don't always make that. But like, if you think that recovery is happening inside the meetings, I hate to ruin it for you folks. That's not for me where it happens. That's where I get centered. I get reminded of why I've got to do the things because I've got this built-in forgetter. But for me, recovery happens out in real life when I'm navigating real life situations and
Right.
dealing with how I'm showing up in those relationships, either in a good way or a not so good way. That's to me where real recovery happens.
I was thinking, how cool would it be? You know, the stories in the back of the book, where this is where I was kind of in the back of the big book, they have personal stories. And my understanding of the personal stories is that those are included in the big book so that, especially if somebody's brand new, they could relate, or they couldn't get to a
Yep.
meeting, they could relate to somebody else. And it goes through generally what it was like, what happened, and what it was like now or at that time when the person got sober. So each of the stories kind of has that cadence to it. And so what I was thinking is, wouldn't that be interesting to do like a where are they now type thing of the stories in the back of the book, and you could sort of make up whatever. I mean, those are real stories, so it would be like what really happened to the person. But yeah, I mean, it's a good reminder that, you know, we don't graduate. Recovery, hopefully long-term recovery is, you know, it's vast and it's not a quick fix type thing, and it's not like a linear thing. And so, yeah, pretty fascinating and very encouraging to hear how other people handle life in sobriety. To handle sobriety is the name of one of the stories in there. And so,
The longer you stay sober, the more funerals you will go to. Right. And I was thinking about that the other day because I've heard that a lot, especially from old timers when I was not an old timer. And I'm not sure I technically qualify as an old timer yet, but I'm getting close. I'm knocking on old timer door. And I'm like, well, okay, yes, but mathematically, the longer I stay alive, the more funerals I will go to because I will have known more people and I will be not dying. So like mathematically, that's going to happen no matter what. So now I'm not as enamored with that phrase, but we do see a lot of people not win this thing, right? And we see a lot of people come into the rooms, come into any kind of peer support recovery situation. I don't care if you're on Clubhouse. I don't care if you're in a Facebook group. There's a lot of, I mean, it's not people that are soaring high on mental health. And for me, it's like I made a lot of horrific mistakes in the early years, but I thought I was doing the right thing. Like I can remember the first few women that I sponsored. God bless. I hope they're still alive and not ruined by what I did, because I didn't know what I was doing. Right. And I was taking women through the book when I hadn't even been through it myself. Like, I don't even know. Like, it was terrible. But I survived, and I think hopefully they did too. But at least my heart was in the right place. I thought I was doing the right thing. And now I've gotten educated. I've gotten much more responsible on what my role is when I'm in that sponsee relationship, and what it's not too. You know, I'm not a help desk. I'm not your therapist. I'm not your personal shopper. I mean, there's a bunch of things I'm not, right? So I just think the recovery community is so fascinating and so chocked full of interesting stories of all different types of characters at all different walks of life. And a lot of unexpected turns can happen. And I think that's what I really enjoyed about this book, Will, is that I could very easily kind of think about this crew of surfers that they were going out and surfing in the morning. They were coming back and taking a nap, and they were going to their meeting. I was like, oh, that sounds kind of nice. I could get
It
down with
does sound good, right?
a little vacation like that, a little 30 days in Tropicana. Like, oh, that sounds kind of nice. Right. So, and then it was like, oh, but no, wait, this is scary. I don't know. This doesn't sound so nice. Oh, I definitely don't want to go there. So I hope 10 years from now, we're all talking about, remember at the beginning when we talked about how cool addiction fiction was going to be before anybody else was talking about it? I hope that we're going to have that conversation, because I just think there's so many amazing stories that can be told through so many different lenses and angles and themes, and I'm just here for all of it.
Yeah, I hope so too. And I love what you said just now about the meeting count, because that's an ongoing, sort of battle in my mind, because I agree that recovery happens out in the world, not for 1 hour in the room. So, but the way that I'm trying to look at it now is, okay, I go out in the world, I make a mess, I make mistakes, then I go back to the meeting and I report back, because I feel like, as somebody who now I have a little bit of time under my belt, I think it's important for people with 6 months, a year, to hear what I'm going through. To me, that's like part of my version of service these days, is to, be honest when I sit down in the room, and when I raise my hand and I say what's been going on with me. That's part of my contribution to it. But I don't go to as many meetings. But the main thing to me is that I don't try to do it alone. So even if I'm not in the room, I'm in it with my team, my guys who are my squad, and I talk to them all the time. And that's one of the things that I really wanted to come through in this book, is that these guys are in it together. They're on this trip together. They're from the same home group. They went through the steps together, and they're like compadres. And I feel like that came through pretty well.
It showed the benefit of fellowship, the benefit of support, the benefit of getting real with others in the program, sticking with those people, just a core group of people you can just really be honest with. And yeah.
And when Troy's guys leave, and go home, that's when things go sideways for him.
Right.
Oh yeah, when your community's gone and you're on your own. Ooh, scary.
Right. Now I'm left by myself, and I'm taking instructions from, this lunatic up between my ears.
Yep.
So that wasn't by accident.
The old jag of self-sponsorship.
That there's a design in there that works really well. I mean, the circle of people I surround myself by are largely people in recovery, but not all. But the one thread that all the people in my inner circle have in common is they don't tell me what I want to hear. They don't. And sometimes I'm like, I actually have to be like, today I actually just need you to tell me what I want to hear. I can't handle anything else. But they tell me, they give it to me straight, and that's what I want, because that's how the real growth happens. The growth does happen in the uncomfortable. I don't remember learning or growing from anything from doing it right and perfectly the first time. Like there's no growth that can happen there, right? And like, I was trying to come up with like taglines for myself the other day. I was like, I make the mistakes, so you maybe don't have to. Like, because I have just been making mistakes at full speed this summer. I shared this actually last week in the Sober Not Mature podcast I was on. But like, I got busy a couple of weeks ago. I was like, just too many things in too many directions. I'd stretched myself too thin, and I'm texting and multitasking. And I ended up talking about somebody behind their back to their face. I texted the wrong person. Well, I texted the wrong person and talked about them to their face. Awful. And so then I call close women in my life, like, what do I do? And they're like, yo, you're not quiet about being a 12-step girl, so you know what you have to do. It's more important than ever you go out and clean this shit up, because you can't be out there squawking that you're Miss Recovery if you're not walking your talk. And I was like, oh, this is the worst. I have to stop talking about being sober. I have to stop talking about being that. That was my knee-jerk reaction, is just stop talking altogether. Okay, well, that's not going to work, because hello, we've met. It's not possible. But I got the opportunity to go and clean it up. Right. And then it was up for that person to decide if they want to keep me in their life or not. I don't get to make that choice, but I can be like, I really messed up. I was hurtful. I was wrong. I was judgmental. I was dishonest. I got to self-correct. This is how I'm going to show up going forward if you'll still have me. And then that's all I can do. Right. And that's a gift of working an active recovery program, is learning how to clean up the messes that I make, because we don't stop drinking and then just stop making messes. We just make more messes, and they're just classier and more detailed.
Or just stop talking about being sober. Then you never have to.
Oh yeah, or I'm just not going to talk about being sober anymore, you guys.
They can just be as unsober as you want from now on.
Yeah.
So that's a perfect segue. I was going to make sure that we touched on, before we wrap up or start to wrap up, I wanted to make sure we touched on amends, because I thought that was a powerful part of the book. And then also, it's the 8th month. So now we're making a list, supposedly, of all the potential amends we have to make because of harms done. And then the 9th month generally is like, that's amends month at a lot of meetings. And so again, I appreciated that you tied the steps into the story, and it just really personalized it for me. So I don't know if you can speak to that, Will, about the amends process that
Yeah.
Troy went through.
I'd love to. Thank you. That was really important to me to get in here. So the one of the themes that was really interesting to me that I wanted to figure out how I was going to incorporate into the story was this sort of cycle. I was going through this in my own life, so I wanted to somehow let this play out in the book. So Troy goes through this sort of vicious cycle of his expectations leading to resentments, right? So all the people in his life, he expects them to behave a certain way, speak a certain way, whatever it may be. And when they don't behave that way, he develops resentments for them. So what does he do when he develops a resentment for them? He acts out. He steps on their toes. In his case, he's kind of a psycho, so he acts out in the past in anger and violence. And so, he has to then, inventory that and go through the process of cleaning it up. And earlier in his life, was all very sort of justified, in his mind. And he had very good reasons. And he wasn't even wrong in a lot of cases of why he was right. But that's not the point, right? The point is, what was your part in it, and clean up your side of it. And so, not doing that, even though he's, by the time he leaves for this surf trip, 4 years sober, has really held him back spiritually. It's held him back in terms of the way he moves through the world. He's still walking around angry. He's still walking around hurt. And as a result, he's still hurting people, right? So that's the other theme in the book that I really loved, is that, hurt people hurt people. So
Yep.
until you stop being hurt, you're not going to stop hurting other people. So you have to
There it
go
is.
through this process, and clean up your side of the street and get yourself right spiritually so that you can stop the cycle.
Yeah. So
Is
good.
that how did the book title Killing Hurt come to be? How did you land on that as the title? I love the title.
It came to be after many hours of messing with different titles. And to be honest with you, I actually went back and added a lot of the stuff about how he developed the nickname Hurt, like earlier in life, to make the title make more sense, because
I get that.
he needed to kill that old guy, the old him, so that he could survive and move forward.
I love that so much. And it's funny, somebody said in a meeting that I was in not long ago that they were, quote, killing the wrong person. So what they were saying was they were trying to kind of essentially Tony Robbins their way through something, and that they were trying to just fill everything with positivity. But until they went back, and in this case, it was with the help of a therapist and somebody else, and they were really unpacking their past and doing a proper inventory and making their amends. It was like, yeah, no, I thought killing my personality was going to work if I could just positively just press forward. But it's like, yeah, the mess is still there. I mean, I can tell you that because I struggle with like, oh, I'll just throw this in the closet and shut the door, doesn't make it go away. So I thought that was brilliantly done. So thank you for that, Will. It was really good.
That's nice to hear. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So Will, what's next for you?
Well, I've got a book coming out at the end of this year, hopefully. I mean, these things always take longer than I think they will. It's actually called The Sponsor. And, I'm really excited about that. My head is all wrapped around that. So it's kind of interesting to go back and talk about Killing Hurt again, because I've been so involved in this other book. So yeah, I'm excited about that. I'm reading a lot of addiction fiction books. I'm writing reviews. I'm trying to sort of build an audience, around addiction fiction, of people who work in recovery, people who, are in recovery themselves. And it's become a bit of a part-time job for me.
Well, I have to tell you, like, this conversation has been fascinating to me. I really went into this not even really knowing. I mean, I had read Killing Hurt, but it's the only addiction fiction book I have read. And I didn't have experience with the genre at all. I mean, I still don't, because, I haven't read it besides your book, but it's very fascinating to me. I love that niche that you sort of found that works so well for you. And I just have to say, like, this was pretty mind-blowing, and I wish you all the best. I can't wait to watch you continue to put out material that's going to help so many on their journey. And it's a big deal. It's a really big deal to be able to follow your creative aspects and dreams, and then also intertwine it as well as you did and be able to put that in writing. And so thank you for sharing your book with the world, and thanks for coming on today. I've really enjoyed meeting you and hearing all about it. It
That
sparked
was
a
super
lot of
fun.
thoughts for me.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed being here. Always enjoyed talking to Elise, and it was great to meet you as well.
Thank you so much. And thanks, Elise, for coming on.
You know, girl, I'm always here to make stuff up with you.
Love it.
And speaking of the 90s music that we, the DJ Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince and Summertime, just a little tease to put out there. But Amy and I are going to an I Love the 90s concert this weekend, and it is being headlined by Vanilla Ice, Color Me Bad, and Blackstreet.
Wow.
So,
That sounds heavy.
Yeah. So, yeah, by the time this episode drops, all those photos and videos will be on social, and we will have gone viral again for more embarrassing footage that Amy and I like to put out. But this was really fun. I really like this idea of reading a book and then having the author come on. I think it's
I did too. I loved it.
I mean, it would be awkward though if we didn't like the book.
I know that's
be clear. So
I don't know how we would navigate that.
I don't know that it's always gonna work, but I liked it in this case. Yeah.
Right, exactly. So on that note, don't forget the book is called Killing Hurt, and it is by Will Thatcher. And Will, thanks so much for coming on again. I really appreciate it. It's been a joy to have you. And to everybody else listening, don't forget to be kind, rewind. Thank you for the honor of your time. Take what you like and leave the rest behind.